Why don't we talk about Mar-a-Lago? There's been a development there before we take our first break. I think we can cover that pretty efficiently. So, remember Aileen Cannon? Dina?
Oh, yeah.
Donald Trump's favorite judge. Well, Donald Trump decided that he needed to remind Aileen Cannon that he's still the president. He nominated her as a judge because he's now moved to intervene in the lawsuit, the Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, effectively brought by American Oversight, which is a public interest group, and the Knight Foundation. They have been litigating for many months now.
So many doing such good work throughout many Trump actions here and keeping this, the toe to the fire. And to your point, Trump has a much harder argument for stopping the release of this information because his former aides there's no longer a trial. You would say otherwise releasing the information could prejudice potential jurors, not give them a fair trial. Now that that's off the table, it's going to be much harder for Judge Cannon to come up with a reason not to. Of course, this is Judge Cannon. And, so she likes to do the bidding of Trump. We think that she was hoping for a higher appointment from him. Who knows? Maybe she's still looking for a promotion. In any case, the argument is basically one, it's grand jury proceedings. It should remain private. There's confidential information, national security information, and the big Jack Smith wasn't even validly appointed. So this information should not come out because basically it's part of a case that was never validly brought and investigated to begin with. That's essentially the Trump argument.
Mar-a-Lago is back in the news, folks. And the question everyone's been asking is this: will we ever see Volume 2 of Jack Smith's closeout report? I'm talking about the hundreds of pages detailing all of the crimes that Donald Trump committed before Aileen Cannon, his judge of choice, decided to bail him out. Well, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals has given Cannon 60 days to make her decision before they make it for her about whether we, the American people, are going to see Volume 2 of the Jack Smith report. We already saw Volume 1 about the D.C. election interference case. We demand to see Volume 2 as well. Let me break down what's happening here because this is crucial. Remember Aileen Cannon, Donald Trump's favorite judge, the one he appointed who has consistently bent over backwards to protect him at every turn? Well, Trump decided he needed to remind Cannon that he's still the president and that he's the one who nominated her to the federal bench. So he's now moved to intervene personally in the lawsuit, the Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, that's been brought by American Oversight, which is a public interest group, and the Knight Foundation. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. These organizations have been litigating for many months now in the 11th Circuit and in Cannon's courtroom at the Southern District of Florida to get Volume 2 of what should be Jack Smith's best-selling report about Trump's prosecutions. Volume 1 we've already seen. A couple hundred pages related to the election interference case that was in front of Judge Tanya Chutkan. That was released by Merrick Garland with Chutkan's approval, and we've all read it. But Volume 2, the one dealing with Mar-a-Lago, with the Espionage Act violations, with the obstruction of justice, with Donald Trump's role in all of that, with his use of employees like Carlos de Oliveira, an IT worker, and his butler Walt Nauta to cover up the fact that he basically stole classified documents and took them with him to Mar-a-Lago when he absolutely shouldn't have, that volume has never been released. And that's one of the many failings of Merrick Garland, in my opinion. He should have released Volume 2 before he left office. Instead, he left it with a cover letter addressed to Pam Bondi saying essentially, well, it's in your hands now. Merrick Garland and Jack Smith couldn't release it on his own authority. It was blocked from being released by Aileen Cannon, initially for what seemed like a good reason at a particular moment when the case was still ongoing against Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira. But then that case got dismissed by the Department of Justice. The appeals are over. There's no chance they're going to be prosecuted again. The statute of limitations is going to run out by the time Democrats potentially take over the Department of Justice again. And this current DOJ under Trump isn't going to prosecute them. So release the documents. There's no legal reason to keep them sealed anymore. The 11th Circuit sent the case back to Cannon and gave her 60 days to make her decision. Let me bring in some legal analysis here about what's been picked up in the filings and where this is likely headed. First of all, thank goodness for the nonprofit organizations doing such good work throughout Trump's various legal actions, keeping pressure on the system, keeping the proverbial toe to the fire. And the key point is that Trump has a much harder argument for stopping the release of this information now because his former aides are no longer facing trial. You see, before, the argument could have been that releasing the information might prejudice potential jurors, might not give defendants a fair trial. Now that that's off the table, it's going to be much harder for Judge Cannon to come up with a legitimate reason not to release the report. Of course, this is Judge Cannon we're talking about, and she likes to do Trump's bidding. People think she was hoping for a higher appointment from him. Maybe she's still looking for a promotion to a circuit court or even the Supreme Court. Who knows? In any case, Trump's arguments are basically threefold. First, these are grand jury proceedings, so they should remain private. Second, there's confidential information and national security information in the report. And third, the big one, Jack Smith wasn't even validly appointed, so this information shouldn't come out because it's part of a case that was never validly brought and investigated to begin with. That's essentially Trump's argument. But it's really hard to sustain that argument, and Cannon might actually get reversed on this if she rules in favor of Trump. Because the fact is, Jack Smith was appointed by Merrick Garland. No higher court has actually upheld Cannon's earlier decision, where she took a footnote from Justice Clarence Thomas in a Supreme Court decision and tried to run with it to invalidate Smith's appointment. That's never actually been affirmed by an appellate court. So you have what should be recognized as a valid appointment of Jack Smith, a valid investigation, valid subpoenas, valid gathering of information. It's very hard to argue against the release of this information, especially when Volume 1 was already released, and especially now that the former aides have had their cases dismissed. Cannon has about 60 days to decide, which means we'll find out her decision by mid-January. My prediction? I think the report should be released. I think Cannon's going to do everything she can not to release it, because that's what Trump wants. And it's going to end up back at the 11th Circuit. Cannon got reversed twice by the 11th Circuit the first time around during the actual Mar-a-Lago case. Judge William Pryor, who's the chief judge sitting in Atlanta for the 11th Circuit, is probably chomping at the bit to get another Cannon case back in front of him, and I think if she messes this up, the 11th Circuit will fix it. I think we'll ultimately see the report. Now look, I'm not going to be shocked by anything in the Mar-a-Lago report at this point. There was a superseding indictment in that case. It was 37 counts. We got a lot of the evidence through reporting, through hearings, through court filings, through motion practice, through press conferences. So yeah, there might be some interesting tidbits in there about individuals we didn't realize were involved in certain aspects of the obstruction, but by and large, we've gotten a lot of the key facts already. Nevertheless, it needs to come out to the public. We, the taxpayers, spent tens of millions of dollars on that investigation. Donald Trump and his lawyers were brilliant, in a Machiavellian sense, in blocking that release while he was running for office. But now there's no reason to keep it sealed. It's a public record. It should be released to the public. So, I agree that Cannon is probably going to find some way to delay or deny release, and then the 11th Circuit will have to step in and correct her decision like they've done before. Because at the end of the day, the public has a right to know what their former president did with classified documents, how he obstructed justice to avoid accountability, and how he used employees to help him cover it up. This is about transparency and accountability. Trump committed serious crimes according to the evidence Jack Smith gathered. He was only saved from prosecution by Aileen Cannon's legally dubious rulings and by winning re-election. But the American people still deserve to see the full scope of what he did. They deserve to read the detailed analysis of his crimes that Jack Smith and his team compiled. Volume 2 of that report sits sealed in Aileen Cannon's courthouse right now. 60 days from now, we'll know whether she's going to continue protecting Trump or whether she'll finally do what the law requires and release it. And if she makes the wrong decision, the 11th Circuit will be there to correct it. Because at some point, even in our broken system, transparency and the rule of law still matter. At least, that's what we keep hoping.